All right, everybody, we are live. This is Dr. Michael Kaye from the Center for Functional Health. And I'm so excited about tonight. I get to speak with Carolena Dunlap. She is the owner of Mindset Counseling Center. Carolena, welcome, welcome. It's so great to have you on. I'm looking forward to hearing from you today. It's going to be great.
Thank you so much. I am very excited for this. Slightly nervous, but very excited.
We're going to have a lot of fun. So for those who've watched this before, they love to know that I love starting out with the hero's journey. So how did you get here? I mean, were you sitting in 6th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, and you go, hey, I have an idea. This is what I want to do. This is my passion. How did you get here?
Well, I appreciate you calling us heroes. I mean, that is never how I would ever identify myself. I'm sure my dad will see this eventually, but he was like, no, don't go into therapy. You're going to struggle financially for the rest of your life. And I actually did my undergrad in speech pathology down in I grew up in North Carolina. And I finished undergrad and I was like, I don't know what to do. So I'm going to go be a beach bum in South Carolina and bartend and wait tables and have some fun and move to PA. And I was like, what's next? I always did amazing in all of my psych classes and I loved them. And somehow or another, just always loved the brain and hearing about it. And I wanted to give back. I mean, that's like the surface level version of I always wanted to give back. Every therapist will tell you this is very much a self-selected field where I think it chose me. Life and childhood was amazing, but through the teenage years, shit happens. We go through a lot of hard things. I went through personally a lot of challenges, just educationally, feeling very depressed, very anxious, not knowing a sense of myself, not feeling like I belonged. And also seeing sometimes a very challenging marriage and desperately wanting to make that better and always wanting to give back. And that just became everything I am. And that's why I'm in what I am, because I love to give back to my community, the people I see, the other therapists that are here. It's my passion. It's everything I am.
That's fantastic. And yes, you are a hero, right?
Oh, thank you.
We need more people like you. I mean, if you take a look at how mental health issues are climbing, I mean, it's so prevalent everywhere.
Yes.
That being said, of the issues, just even if everything is going great, it's still so important to sit and talk with someone, right? So I treat a lot of people with irritable bowel syndrome. I treat a lot of autoimmunity, chronic fatigue. I'll even say we even treat people who have long COVID, right? So these are people that are treating, and yes, they have these symptoms. And when we get down to it, there's also this emotional issue that's tied to it. And maybe they felt great before, but the diagnosis itself creates an emotional issue, and we need to address that. And I think this is where you guys really play a large role in helping me and my patients. So I appreciate that. I want people to understand that, like, it's not because you're depressed or you have anxiety or you feel you're going out of your mind or you think you're bipolar because you read something on Google. Like, you have to sit with a professional like yourself. So thank you for the work you do. You know, you brought up the teenage years.
Oh, yes.
But touch on that because that's really, really important. So in the teenage years, you know, growing up in Philly, it's like, hey, shit happens. You know what? Hold your chin up, put on your big boy pants. That's just the way it is. And this is going to toughen you. And as a male, we hear that a lot too, right? And I talked about this with another therapist. You know, we're taught to compartmentalize, not to cry, and we have to get tough. That's what we have to do. So there's the balance of, hey, you have to address some issues. And then there's the balance of like, hey, you know what? Just by hormetic stress alone is how you build resiliency. So how do you balance that in the teenage years, especially when the hormones are
That's a very good question. And I see a lot of teenagers. I still work a lot with them. And just for them to understand and make sense of themselves of like, yeah, my hormones are going all over the place. Just also an understanding of like all of this is developing and growing right now. So sometimes what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, and what I want, it doesn't make sense. And I have no idea where this is coming from. And also being able to say, okay, I know exactly what I'm longing for. I know what I'm fearful of. I know what is impacting me, what relationships in friendships are impacting me, how they are. That's when I need to address it. So sometimes it's a little of both. Sometimes it's more one thing than the other thing. It very much depends on what they're presenting with that day and what's going on in their household, and also helping them normalize themselves, because they always feel like they don't fit in right now. They're teenagers. They barely know themselves. And it's our job to guide them and say, it's okay not to be okay. It's okay not to fit in, not feel normal. And we're here. And we're also going to help you understand yourself and also teach you and guide you into healthier choices to manage these things that come through each day.
And that does give them the tools, right? And it's hard to have those. You can hear about those tools, but you got to use those
You got to
tools, right?
experience it, and then you got to use it.
Right. So how do we balance that though with like, but listen, you also got to toughen up a bit too, because
Mhm.
some people say like, hey, we got a lot of marshmallows out, right? People are too soft, right? So how do we balance it out and give them some of that inner strength as well?
Yes. Well, there are times where you do need that tough love, where it's, your positive sandwich, where you're like, I love you and I'm giving you this consequence, or I'm telling you and having to be harsh. I love you and I want the best for you. I want you to make the healthiest choices. And this can't happen anymore. This behavior needs to stop. We need to work together to find a different way. I can understand where you're coming from. I can validate, I can empathize. I'm getting to them on an emotional level, but that does not mean that we are not correcting, that we're not giving them something to problem solve, helping them problem solve, or sometimes, unfortunately, giving consequences or limiting access and opportunity to certain things. It's like that balance between tough love, but it's all wrapped in love. It's all wrapped in this attachment based, I love you and I want the best. And that's not always going to be easy or nice.
Right. So it's not punishment,
It's
right?
not
That's the whole
punishment.
thing. Because often it's seen as you're taking my phone away from me, right?
Oh, God forbid, because
Right.
that is always all hell breaks loose on that one.
Right. Yeah. So it's seen as punishment. The one thing I enjoy, right? You're taking that away, and I can see both sides of it, right? Because you're really taking away their communication, right? And you're walling them off. So a part of me goes, hey, listen, I understand, we can't have the phone because a lot of dangers with that. But also it's like, hey, there's some abuse here too, and you can't use the phone. This is it. This is not punishment. It's like these are the consequences.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's how I see it. So you do treat a lot of teenagers,
I do.
and I'd be remiss not to discuss and have you share your thoughts on how COVID directly impacted our teenagers, and what can they do to take the next step to get out of that.
COVID absolutely impacted our teenagers. Our teachers are seeing it. We're seeing it in their academics, and we're seeing it drastically in their emotional well being. The ability to isolate, to struggle to connect to others, whether they're in high school, middle school, all the way up through those college years, struggling to sometimes to build these friendships and connections and be able to alternate between TV and iPad and phone time. And when do I need to pay attention in class? And I shouldn't be using technology, helping them find that balance. We're seeing an increase in anxiety from too much social media, too much screen time, too much of that. You're talking through the phone, but not talking in person, not having enough extracurricular activities, and this underlying just fear. I'm freaking terrified of what's to come. I'm terrified of being locked down again. I'm terrified of how other people are seeing me, of getting COVID. And that fear will hijack your body. It hijacks your brain. And as you know, impacts your stomach. It impacts your
Mhm.
emotional ability to be present, to manage your stress and your anxiety. And it's hard. And it didn't take us long to get into COVID, but it's going to take us a hell of a long time to get out of the emotional mentality that has happened, not just from getting COVID, from the fear of it, from the lockdown, from watching other people get it, from the loss that people have experienced. It's drastically, it's here, and we're going to be dealing with this and working through this as a community for quite a while.
So when's that date when it'll all be done? Do you have that? Because I'll write that down right now.
Absolutely, I do. I have that date. I will let you know.
Thank you. Thank you. You text it to me. I appreciate it. So,
Yes.
but what can we share with teenagers now, right? So what can we say, like, here's something that you really need to work on. COVID really, gave you the 1-2 punch. You're up against that turnbuckle for several months,
Yeah.
right? So every time we think you were out of it, you're back in it again. And then it's a constant barrage of news. So what can you share? What can you say, like, hey, this is something that you need to work on? Is there a book they can read, or there's, maybe not a book, an article that they can Google or something like that? Like, what do you guys have as tools that you can share with them? And I know everybody's different, but just as a generality.
So typically I am such, I can't find the word for it right now, but it's like hit the issue that's brought in every way humanly possible. So I want to come from it at every angle. So yes, we are going to talk about like some psychoeducation and books, and we'll run through and do different games. We will do different worksheets together. We do that piece where we're like, okay, how do we manage the anxiety? Is probably the anxiety and the depression are the two biggest things I'm seeing after COVID. So yes, we teach them their coping skills, which are great, but we also teach them, how do you identify what anxiety is? How is it manifesting? What does it feel like in your body? How are you feeling on the inside? And how are you showing up on the outside? How can we label that for ourselves, start to soothe that and teach them ways to soothe that, and work on improved communication towards other people, whether it's their peers and especially their parents, because they're already going through so much and they have no idea that, oh my gosh, this is actually maybe anxiety. Maybe this is depression. I don't want to leave my bed. I don't want to go to school. What's wrong with me? And they have no idea how to take care of their own selves, their bodies, their emotions, their relationships. So we truly do have to hit it at every angle. So I wish it was a be all, end all, fix all with one thing, but I check every aspect of that teenager's life. And I say, how's the sleep? How's your diet? What are your supplements? How's your exercise? Who are you spending time with? Like, so there's a lot that goes into it besides the emotions, but they're all linked back to their emotional well-being and being able to understand themselves and communicate that in healthy ways.
Which is fantastic. And it's like what we do at the office with our functional medicine and even our manual medicine. We want to look at the whole person.
Yes.
Right? So it's not just, yes, you came in with the irritable bowel, and I get that, but also what has happened before, right? What was happening during? What have you tried? What has worked? What has not worked? How else is this affecting you? And that's how you really dig in deep, right? So it's not just that one thing, like you say. So it's almost like that machine gun approach, right? We want to look at that whole person, and you look at that whole person emotionally, which is absolutely wonderful. And since we're talking about the whole person, can you talk about whole brain child? Because you talk about that on your site. There's a book out on whole brain child. Can we spend a little time talking about whole brain child?
Absolutely. I love doing whole brain child work. Dan Siegel is like the main guy who's known for it. He has written a lot of books, but Whole Brain Child is the workbook that I often use with parents when I'm working with children to early adolescence and sometimes getting towards those teenage years as well. And basically what it does is it helps the children and the parents understand their brains. They go into, so often we have children that come into the office and they're throwing tantrums, or they are, I've heard it like they're throwing fits, they're throwing tantrums, they are refusing to go to school, they are having all of these presenting behaviors, and the parents have no idea what to do with it. So they default to what they learned in their childhood or saw, or maybe even didn't see, and it's not working. So they become in these really negative, harsh patterns with each other, creating emotional distance. So what Whole Brain Child does in an essence is it helps parents and children understand their brains and what it's doing when it becomes dysregulated. And then it teaches them, how do I not only change this behavior, but how am I emotionally attuning to my child, my adolescent, to change this behavior? There's amazing techniques of how do we teach our child, even just using different vocabulary. Stop using time out. You can call it time in or chill out spot or, your happy tent or whatever the kid wants to call it. You're having certain spaces for that. We're teaching parents how to connect their child to redirect, which is kind of like what we were talking about earlier, is being able to get on your child's level to validate and empathize. Empathize is so different than sympathy. Like empathizing, meaning I am feeling what you're feeling. I am in this emotion with you. Maybe I don't agree with it, but there's some place inside of me that can relate to this. So I'm there and I'm validating and I'm empathizing. And then I'm coming in with a new correction, because it's teaching parents and children that if you just throw logic and say, don't do this, don't do that, it's just going to make it worse and nothing's going to get better. They keep saying, I put in these rules, and it's not working. Whole brain child is an awesome opportunity for parents and children to understand how they can communicate their abilities. How we talk about, one of my favorites is the downstairs brain and the upstairs brain. So when we're in emotional dysregulation, we are stuck on the bottom floor of our house, and it feels like we are having all these big emotions. That's your bottom floor. That's the bottom of our brains. It's that amygdala and all those automatic things. The top of that logic, the reasoning, the problem solving. On a normal basis, most of us can go back and forth up and down that staircase to understand emotion and logic, logic and emotion. But when a child is dysregulated, it's like someone went into that house and ripped the freaking staircase out, and they have no ability to go from their big emotions to their logic. So whole brain child, what it does is helps parents to work with their child to teach them these skills of how do you rebuild that staircase, whether it's breathing techniques, certain other mindfulness exercises, and an attunement to your child. We forget that when we're adults to get into the mind of our children. We forget what it feels like to be a child. And it kind of reteaches that while also bringing in a lot of that neuroscience, which is always geeky fun as well.
So with whole brain child, it's really like you're almost treating the parents
a lot of the time
as well, right? So I mean, it's not just the child, it's the parents as well. So is there ever a time, like, is there somebody who is not a candidate for this therapy? Like when you look at this, is like, I'm not going to use this set of tools for this individual because they express something that's so different than others?
There are certain times where I'm saying, is there something else contributing to these behaviors that we are missing? Have we made sure all of necessary testing is done? Are we missing a learning disability? Are we missing a medical issue that's just been overlooked that we must take care of first? Then we can go into the emotional work. And that has happened with people. People who are not, a lot of times we'll get unintentionally a parent that's saying, hey, this is my kid, this is their behaviors, here you go, can you fix this? Yeah. And I'm like, one, they're not the problem, and we don't want to see them as the problem. And it's truly, truly teamwork. There's not a child or adolescent that comes into my office where one of my requirements is I need that parent involvement. At least one parent. If I can get both parents involved, that's perfect. But I do need to have that parent buy-in, because it's not okay or appropriate to be like, okay, kid, you need to learn all this, you need to implement it, and you need to understand it and just do it whenever. That's not fair to the child, nor is it developmentally appropriate.
Sure. And I think it would have to be tough on like the single parent. You know, I'm sure you see a lot of that. Single parents are, man, they're tough, man. They do everything. I mean, it's hard on them, I think. You know, I had the opportunity and honor taking care of my daughter, and it was just me, and it was for 8 weeks when my wife was pregnant with my son. And hat off to the single parents. I mean, it is a lot of work physically, emotionally. I mean, just they often, put themselves behind too. So I'm sure you have your slew of single parents and children that you speak with as well.
You make a very valid point, because a lot of times, it's so stressful, whether they're single parents or they're a couple, or even co-parenting as divorced parents. There's so much that they carry in their lives that Whole Brain Child does a great job of helping the parents understand themselves as well. Why are they reacting in anger and frustration? Why is that immediate reaction to be tense and to raise your voice? It helps the parents as well understand themselves and where their own stuff comes from, understanding their childhood, what they saw, what they learned, and understanding their own emotional well-being. So we're really truly treating that parent, whether a single parent or multiple parents, to make sure they're okay so that they can show up for their child in the best way possible.
I'm sure in many of your sessions and speaking with parents, there's this, hopefully this recognition of like, oh my, this is my baggage. This is my trauma. And then you have to address that trauma, because if we don't, it's hard for them to move forward. Or, they bottle it up and they end up seeing me for,
Yes.
symptoms, of gut issues and autoimmune and all that, right? So, I'm sure that happens quite a bit. So can you then talk about this EFT? So when I first saw it, I'm like, so we know that like people think EFT was the whole tapping thing and all that, but in your case, it's that emotionally focused therapy, right? So can you talk about that?
I love emotionally focused therapy. It comes into every aspect of the therapy I do, whether it's children's, adults, couples. I primarily do EFT, like to the core EFT with couples. EFT, which is emotionally focused therapy, developed way back in the 80s by Dr. Sue Johnson. And she has an attachment-based perspective. So attachment is the things that we go through in our life impact us, whether we like it or not, whether we remember it or not. And it determines how and why we show up today in certain situations, for the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between. So it helps. So through an attachment lens, it helps couples to understand why and how they're showing up and how they get into these negative patterns with each other. So many couples come into this office and they're so entrenched. You can see, and I feel them longing for connection, longing for that love. And they are so lost entrenched in what they call the negative cycle, and they don't know how to get out. So EFT is evidence-based practice, like couples therapy, which I think is fantastic, because unfortunately there have been a lot of couples therapy out there that just doesn't work. I hear a lot of times we're playing the blame game. We've recounted just our arguments over the past week. We just check in and see how it's doing, and they tell us what we're supposed to do. Emotionally focused therapy isn't experiential. It's also present focused. There's a lot of different aspects to it, but it's about guiding the couple in the room to be very present with their emotions. It's very live emotions that are showing up, and guiding them to experience how to understand their cycle, call it out, and to change the way that they're communicating with each other to create a better bond and a more connection between them. And it is the most beautiful, powerful thing to see in the room. It is awesome. I love emotionally focused therapy.
Now, with the lockdowns that we have, was this good for couples or bad for couples? What did you see? I mean, I know it's 50-50, but like
it can be 50-50.
Practice, what have you seen? Like, maybe couples you were treating and this like really brought them together and it was really well. And there was like, oh my, this did not turn out well at all.
I would love to say I mostly saw a bunch of coming together, but the reality is I saw so many couples during COVID and still today that life made it really, really easy to stay busy and to just go and do and distract. All the while they were creating a bigger and bigger disconnect within themselves. And COVID put them in one house for an extended period of time where they didn't really have that much of an escape. So everything came out, and then they realized, oh shit, I don't know how to make this better. I don't know how to get unstuck. I feel so stuck in this, and I feel like I'm having the same argument over and over about the same things. What do I do? And that was the beauty of emotionally focused therapy, was the ability to see these couples, even did like online through COVID to help them get unstuck, because sometimes COVID did not do great for couples most of the time.
Yeah. So, I mean, some of my patients, they'll talk about, well, maybe as a couple, we just need to smoke a bowl, right? We need to have an experience. We need to have a psychedelic experience to bring us to the next level. But I also know that when we talk about like psychedelics and we talk about cannabis, sometimes it opens up Pandora's box, and these other things come out that like, oh damn, I wish that would have stayed in the box. So if we can focus our attention now moving forward, like where does the role of cannabis play? I mean, we talked briefly about like psychedelics and ketamine when you and I were on the phone. So, I mean, ketamine has helped quite a few of my patients in that chronic pain cycle. We have patients who had that opiate-induced constipation. They finally came off of the opiates. They find that cannabis that is controlled that helped them. We have some patients that have MS, and they'll have some cannabis in the morning that helps them go to work, and then something at night that turns them down. So where do these type of agents play a role, and like for who and for when, and what should we use more so as a metric to see, is this working?
Right. That's a good question. And it's a complex question. So let's answer. When it comes to couples, I have had many couples that will do psychedelics, and they will actually go to a retreat or sometimes even on their own to try to create a new connection. I will often say, okay, I'm down with this. I love all the research that's coming out. Hopefully one day I will get fully trained and fully certified in that. That would be amazing. And also in our sessions, let's practice positive communication. Let's work on the connection and getting unstuck, so that when you do have that experience and Pandora's box opens, Pandora's box is already opened in this room. And the best thing about Pandora's box was what was left? Hope, which I love. That's my job, is to hold their hope for them when they have nothing. And when they work on that and then they can incorporate stuff, I've seen success. It works on that connection. They're not just sitting at a dinner table and staring at each other and saying, let's talk about the kids, or let's talk about what the activities are. Sometimes that works, but when you are really entrenched, like as a person or as a couple, sometimes we need experiences. And for some couples, it is psychedelics. There's lots of wonderful research about allowing people to go in and work on their trauma. It seems like more and more lately that it's coming out as like they're popping up everywhere, where you can go and do these treatments, which are amazing. A lot of clients I see use medical marijuana and medical cannabis, and it's very helpful. I'm very mindful, and we talk a lot about what is it for? When is it used? When is it helpful? And when are we having negative intentions with it? Meaning, are you using it to distract yourself, to cover up and to sweep something under the rug, or using this for true medical reasons? And when it's true medical reasons, I am absolutely in full support and encouragement.
I've had some, friends who, started using cannabis obviously at a younger age, and then found out later in life they had to get away from it because that's actually contributing to their depression. So it wasn't lifting them away from it anymore, it was actually contributing to it.
Yeah.
So I can see where it can be both positive and negative. We talked briefly when we started about cannabis, and I said, one of my patients, their child is going through some test anxiety, and then heard through a friend of a friend, hey, just taking some of these gummies and these cannabis, and then everything will be great. And, rainbows and leprechauns and all good stuff, right?
Oh, God.
So that's not going to help with the actual root cause.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And like some of the gummies and the CBD and stuff out there, there's not enough study. There's not enough research yet. There's not enough studies, and they still have so much more to do on that. So I'm not a super encourager for it. I use CBD gummies on my dog for his hip dysplasia, but I don't use it on my children.
Right.
And it can increase some of those symptoms, depression and anxiety. We
Right.
have to be mindful.
I just don't think, that somebody is overseeing the manufacturing process and that we're getting what we're really getting, especially if we're going to give it to a young person, right? So an older person may be able to metabolize it completely different than a young person.
Yes.
So if we can talk a little bit about test anxiety.
Yes.
I went through test anxiety when I went through chiropractic college in the beginning, and it was beaten out of me basically because we were tested up the wazoo. So can we talk about test anxiety? This you see the scantron, you see the test coming down the aisle. You see your other students, your friends who are handing it in faster than you. I
Mhm.
got to get the A. I've got to get the A. What
Mhm.
can we do about all of that? Like, how do we address that?
I think it's so important that we address that because it's coming more and more common. And it's this whole part of anxiety in general. And it absolutely manifests of we want to do our best to, if we're seeing it, to talk to our schools, talk to our guidance counselors, work with a therapist to understand it, see where it's showing up, why it's showing up, and teach these kids skills that they might not have. They don't have the tools in their toolbox to say, what do I do in a situation where I just see the test? I know it's coming and my heart is just pounding. And then my mind just goes blank. Because a lot of times I hear that. I get test anxiety. I've studied and I know nothing.
Yeah.
That was you too. I felt that as well. And like I had that. I had to take a horrible statistics class in college before grad school. And I had the worst test anxiety because I suck at math. And I went through and I was like, okay, I'm in therapy. Let me see what I can try. I did a mindfulness eating exercise with a piece of chocolate every test. And it was a small, like chocolate mint. So I walked myself through a very like calming, using my five senses, mindfulness exercise before the test. I worked on a lot of that inner self talk. So we do a lot of that parts work and having a child understand the part of them that's really anxious, that's scared to fail, feeling the pressure, and teaching them how to soothe that and talk to it in a kind way so that they are able to turn down the volume of that anxiety. The anxiety is not going to 100% go away. I might be a little worried if it was like zero because we do need that part of us. We need that part of us to say, hey, there's a big deal. There's something coming and I need you to be prepared. However, I don't need you to go in full fight or flight mode. It's like a faulty fire alarm sometimes that can go off in us. And we're teaching them, okay, the fire alarm's going off. How do I turn this off? How do I use my positive self-talk, mindfulness? How am I preparing myself with a good breakfast? How are my study habits? How are my sleep habits to make sure, and that positive encouragement from the parents as well, that they are ready for those tests and that it's okay to be nervous. Here's how you handle it.
And before we move on, you said horrible statistics class. Nobody ever said I took this great statistics class, just for the record, right? So nobody's ever, I don't think everybody's ever said that. But
Point.
at least the people I hang around with never say great statistics class. So what do we do post, right? So we took the test, we didn't do great. And we know society is pushing, like, it's not even a 4.0 more, right? I think it's more than a 4.0 that somebody can get, right?
Mm.
So to apply to a college, they want greater than a 4.0. You have to, volunteer some class. You maybe have some athletic or music behind you. You have to start a nonprofit. You're saving the world. Like, okay, so what do we do with all this? How do we help the teenager mind? Like, how do we get through this? Because you know what? In the real world, people a lot of people didn't go to Harvard and they did amazingly well, right? They didn't go to Stanford, they did amazingly well. Not that they're bad colleges, but what can we share with those teenagers who are ready to go to college? Like, hey, it's not worth getting an ailment along the way.
Absolutely. And to tell that to a teenager of, hey, it's okay. It's not a big deal. You will get into a college. Like, yes, that's most of the time. That's absolutely true. But are they going to understand that? No. That's that logic to logic where they're like, nope, taking that, I'm throwing it out. Where we, after a test and when they fail, we empathize with them. We say, oh my gosh, I saw how hard you studied. Give them that moment to have their sadness, to have their disappointment. Talk to them about their emotions. Help them explore that of like, wow, you spent all of those hours studying your butt off. We practice and we practice. I know how hard you worked. And I can see how sad and disappointed you are in yourself that this did not go better. And not but, and I'm so proud of your work. I'm so proud of your effort. Let's talk through the worries that are coming up right now about school. Let's work together to handle that. Let's talk through it because I know that you can get into a good school. I know that this is not the end of the world. But help me so that I can help you understand and get there. Because getting them to logic over here from their trapped in their basement of emotion, it takes a lot of, I'm softening, I'm being with you, because desperately every teenager comes in there like, this is so cheesy to say, but like they need to be heard, held, and seen, just like we do in relationships as couples, just like we do as individuals, regardless of our age, just like we did as babies. If we don't have that, well, we saw that really crazy, unethical experiment with babies that were all just left in a room and never touched. They died because they did not.
Can you talk about that? Can you talk about that?
There was, I would love to tell you the name of this study, but it resonated with me. When we learn about attachment is babies need not just feeding and their diaper change, they need love and affection. We are hardwired as human beings to need love and affection, to be heard, held, and seen. And if you don't do that to a baby, they did an experiment where they had babies in a room and they basically met their needs. They gave them food, clothing, shelter, the general gist, kept them clean, all of that. Then they did other babies where they did that, but they gave them love. They gave them affection. They were coddled. They were held. They were loved and kissed and smooched and all of that. The babies did not survive. That did not have love. I can't tell you when the study was, but it hits you in your core. It's very similar to the still face experiment. It's hard to watch for me to watch that still face experiment where you see a baby, the mom just is playing with the baby and stops reacting.
Yes.
Her heart is like ripping out. And that baby does anything in their power to get the attention. Just because we're teenagers, adults, just because we're 85 does not mean we changed. We are hardwired for connection and to need that. And when we don't have it, we are in full distress. So no matter what we're going through in our marriages or as teenagers in test anxiety, we need to know that we are heard, held, and seen to be able to soothe so any logic can sink in so we can get to problem solving. That whole central nervous system needs to be soothed. We just don't say that to our clients. We talk about feeling heard, held, and seen, the power of touch, the power of seeing and feeling in every way possible, the power of love.
And you brought up a valid point. All that, and in my clientele, the elderly that I see, boy, there's sometimes a lack of that, right? Fortunately, my practice is manual, so it's this touch, right? So, and they don't get hugged, they don't get touched, they don't get seen, they are invisible quite often, especially if one loses a spouse. They kind of just like crawl inwards and stay there, and they never get out. So, so those hugs do go a long way.
Oh, absolutely. As long as it's at least 30 seconds.
At least there, right? So, but it's weird because during COVID, boy, there was no touch, right? And we lost that human touch. And, in my office, obviously, this is how I, have a business. So it's really important. But, that's a great point that you brought up is, you have to have that human connection.
Yes.
So on that line of human connection, everybody is stuck to their phones. Right? So what kind of tools can you share to everyone? Because it's not just teenagers, Adults are stuck to it. Well, listen, I go down that Instagram, rabbit hole. Oh, I like that. Oh, that's a great recipe. Oh, that's a great exercise. Oh, look, somebody falls and gets hurt. That still gives me great joy. I watch the comedians. Oh, dogs. And then I go through the dogs video, right? I love watching the dogs. Everything is wonderful. Now it's 30 minutes later. I mean, I finally had to put like a time limit, go, I'm done.
Yes.
So what can you share with those people who are just hooked? Because when we do an elimination protocol, many times it's not just food, it's
technology,
it's news. It's like, you want to eat bad food? They say no. I go, then why are you watching the news, right? That's like eating bad food for your brain.
It's bad, and people don't recognize it. I do love your time limit. Sometimes we need, because we do get lost in the reels. Sometimes we do need time limits. Sometimes we need to be mindful of when we are turning off our phones. So trying to limit our technology at least an hour before bedtime. I get it. That's hard for a lot of people, but trying our best as humans to say, you know what? I set my alarm. My emails are done. Everything's done. I'm done. Put your phones down. Connect with your kids. Connect with your spouse, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, whoever it is. Connect, because that heals you. So making sure we're being mindful of when we're using our phone, why we're using our phone, to do a temperature check on yourself. Right now, am I using my phone because I really don't want to handle this conflict that just came through my email? Or am I handling my phone just I have 5 extra minutes and I don't have enough time to do anything else, so I'm just going to look through something. Like, what is the intention behind your use? We talk about intention a lot, and just helping people, what is my intention right now? We'll tell you, do you need to keep scrolling or do we need to put this down? Trying our best to maybe take our apps off of our phones are great. Monitoring what we're watching, keeping those, the time limits, yes, but there's a certain part where it says your screen time totals. Make it a game with yourself. Oh, this week I did this much time on my phone. Let me see if I can drop it down by 5 minutes next week. It's about progress, not perfection. So being patient with yourself and trying what works. Do I try not to take it in the bathroom every time I'm going? Do I try to take that down by 1? It's really, really hard, and we want to set people up for success with this. So I will say sprinkle in where it works. Maybe this week you're just trying to do 1 hour before bed. Maybe this week you're trying to keep it in your pocketbook or your book bag at all times until you're home. Whatever it is, we're trying to sprinkle and try different things of saying, this is hard. Yes, it's hard. And the longer we do it, the more it becomes routine, the easier it gets. And also be mindful of what you're watching, right? If you are really, cat videos and dog videos, all that is really fun to watch. But if we got starting to sucked into the drama, it makes me concerned about the people that are watching like the murder mysteries and the true crime. And I'm like, it makes me curious about what's going on, that this is meeting your needs instead of turning outwards, turning to the people that are our people, our person, to connect. Why is this meeting our needs instead of this person that's supposed to be meeting our needs?
Right. You're just scrolling mindlessly.
Yes.
That's all you're doing, right? You're just scrolling mindlessly. And people snack mindlessly, right? They snack. And you want to go like, what do you do with this time? What did everybody do with their time before all of this, right?
I don't know. We hung out outside.
You hung outside. You played outside. You hung outside. You spoke to your neighbors. You're a part of your community. Nobody mindlessly went through the Britannica Encyclopedia, right? Nobody was doing that. So, I kind of see the phone, the mindless activities, almost like, when people just mindlessly snack. I'm like, are you hungry? No, it's snack time. I'm like, well, where on the clock does it say snack time? I see the numbers, but nowhere does it say snack, right? Snack time.
Right. That body mind awareness of like, am I doing this for boredom right now? Whether it's the food, whether it's our phone, or am I actually needing something? Am I hungry? Is my body asking for something? And sometimes we turn to our phones longing because we have a longing inside of us that's not being met. Maybe because we're not noticing it, we don't know it's there. Maybe our partners aren't able to meet that need, or we're too afraid because of our cycles to ask for what we're needing anymore. So we do what's easy, which is turn outwards to our phones and to technology. But the more we turn to technology, the more anxious we are, the more depressed we are, the more we're longing, and the more emotional disconnect we're having in our relationships with people. So it's so important. People forget how hard it is to turn down that phone, but how important it is.
Right. And I would say even my wife will remind me when I'm looking at something. She's like, I'm like, look at this, and she's like, is that real? I'm like, look, yeah. And that's a great question, right? Is that real? Is that actually true? Right? Because there's a lot of false things that are on there. I mean, I remember a long time ago there was a show where it was a photographer, and they had young kids there, and they saw these other people walk in, and the people they walk in who were wearing like hoodies and sweats and stuff like that, they were the models, and they only looked like the models after the photographer took the photos and did the editing and said, oh, look, well, her thigh looks a little thick here, so we're just going to edit out the inside thigh, and really show these teenagers who are trying to aspire to look like what's on a cover, that is just...
It's not real.
It's not real, right? So when we're looking on the phones, we can say, we have to ask that question, is this true? Is this real? And how does this affect me? And you brought up, when you're scrolling through, it's a brain thing, right?
Right.
It's a brain thing. And it's the same thing with like eating. It's a brain thing. And, that's our segue into like nutrition. I know you love nutrition. I love talking about nutrition. So from our perspectives, we see food as medicine, medicine is food. Yes. Sometimes you need this food, sometimes you need that food. We can agree here that broccoli is absolutely wonderful. Yes. Chock full of great antioxidants. It's good for you. We know about that. But for somebody with irritable bowel syndrome, it's not the right thing, right? So it feels like a road slow in our stomach. So from a perspective of the patients you see, when you talk about nutrition, what do you see as the underlying denominator? Like everybody just eating a lot of processed foods? You see these people more dairy? What do you do with nutrition recommendations when you see your patients? And does it differ with their presentations from one presentation to another?
It can very much look different depending on our clients that we're seeing. But it's a big part of my intake process is understanding their diet, their sleep patterns, their supplement pattern, like what they're already in their system, to just check what they are doing to contribute, because the medication they're on or just having therapy, they are coming in because they want to see a change in themselves. And I'm saying, you want to see change. The more we do in session, the more we address it in every direction, the more progress you're going to see within yourself. So we just do very, very general education of we'll talk about what healthy foods are versus not healthy foods. We talk about my plate. We go to a very basic elementary level of teaching, what is a whole grain? Why are we trying to have the most colorful plate possible? Why do we care about that? I see a lot of kids and teenagers and adults, they're eating tons of sugar, tons of this just white bread, because it tastes yummy, tons of sugar, tons of processed food, where if you look on the back, you can't pronounce half of it. And it may say, it may be this, but the ingredients, that's not even the first ingredient. So just teaching them some basic education on here's how you read a label. Here's how we can make it fun. We can play games with it at nutrition, and just understanding, hey, are you open to learning about this to see if you change this on top of you're now having mental health, like you're in therapy, you're increasing your exercise. Let's get the biggest bang for our buck. Let's see, let's notice. Worst case scenario is you absolutely hate it and you don't want to do it anymore. But that's never been the case from what I've seen. We've always seen progress. We've seen such a decrease in anxiety in being able to handle and manage their everyday stressors. So I want to make sure, are your iron levels fine? Is your vitamin D? Is your omega 3s? Like, you're coming in and all of some of this medical, their basic blood work is off the charts of like, half of this is way below or way above where it needs to be at times. Like, this is what your doctor's telling you. Okay, now let's talk about the emotional piece of it. Why is it that we're scared? Talk to me about the fear to make that change. What is the hard part? Because food is emotion. Like, when we're babies, we automatically associate food with emotion. That's the first thing we see is baby milk, right? It releases all those happy hormones. So just helping them also build a healthy relationship with their food so that they're not eating their emotions either, and they're eating healthy, making good choices.
Or being rewarded with food too, right? Because that sets up a whole nother problem system is rewarding with food. Hey, you know what? You did great on the test and we're going to celebrate with food. And, you got the job. We're going to celebrate with food. And
not great.
So, I mean, that's not healthy either.
Right. Google's your best friend. You can Google 101 free and inexpensive rewards for kids that are not food related.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, we see it in our practice that calmness that occurs, it doesn't happen the first week, right? It doesn't happen the second week. Around the beginning of week 3, we have like, I always know I'm doing well and the patient's following the protocol if they want to kill me, right?
Yeah, basically.
So, I mean, they're having withdrawal. And I always bring up, like, if you're having withdrawal by getting away from these foods, then you shouldn't be eating those foods, right? Because I mean, you can go a week without broccoli and you're not freaking out, right? But when they start going through this elimination protocol and they're shaky and they don't feel good and they're headachy, it's like, yeah, it's time to be done with these foods. It doesn't mean that you cannot ever not have them. It just means, hey, we got to slow the roll. So, thank you so much for asking about nutrition. I think it's one of the overlooked questions that happens in therapy, that happens in traditional conventional medicine. It's really important because this is, what you're eating every day. This is supposed to keep you going. Do you want to treat yourself like you're a Ferrari, or you want to treat yourself like you're an old beat up Chevy? And that's what it really comes down to. What are you willing to eat and invest in? And I know people will say organic food is expensive and eating healthy. I'm not talking about buying organic food. I'm talking about you can go into Wawa and you can choose to have a hoagie or you can get one of their salads.
Exactly. Sometimes it's baby steps, and those baby steps add up. They make a difference in people's lives.
Right. So, I mean, that choice, always making the best choice at the given time. So, I really thank you for asking your patients about that. In your experience, what have you seen nutritionally the most? Like when they got rid of grains, did you see the best outcome? Dairy, did you see the best outcome? Was there anything like that really pops to mind? Like, wow, this one just knocks out of the ballpark. Or, hey, when they reintroduced it, things started to slide again.
Oh, man. I've seen some really cool success stories. A lot of it, I've seen clients that will pull just off of dairy and it's completely changed their world and their anxiety. They've stopped certain processed foods, or they've realized there's like certain dyes or things in foods. And I see some extreme behaviors, ripping apart houses, destruction of property, verbal aggression will go down to little to none. It's so powerful. I've seen severe immobilizing panic attacks where you can barely function. And on top of that, you can't get away from the bathroom. And I have seen that change and that was more of like everything completely changed. The gluten, the dairy, the processed foods, the sugar, like the amount of water that they're putting in their system, all of that's changed. And it's like their anxiety and it just so drastically low. It went from like a 9 to a 3. It was with that alone. And that is powerful. Food is so powerful and so important. The water that we do. I'm like, how much water did you drink today, guys? Because I'm already in my gallon today.
Mhm.
So I'm a little excessive right now. But how much are we doing? What are we doing to our minds, our bodies, and our souls? Because I bet you wouldn't treat your best friend this way. So why would we treat ourselves this way?
That's great, right? Like you wouldn't use the language you use about yourself, or you wouldn't treat yourself like your best friend. I like that. It's excellent. So can you share with us what's it like when somebody comes to your office? Can you do a walkthrough? Like
Yes.
they contact you via phone? Do you do virtual? What's an intake look like? People say, well, once you go to therapy, you always have to go to therapy. I'm like, well, you exercise every day, right? So it makes sense in my brain.
Yes.
What's it like when somebody works with you?
So we get inquiries through our emails, through phone calls, through social media, sometimes through word of mouth. And I try to do a phone call. I try to do an email is often like the fastest for me because I try to get back. My requirement is you got 24 business hours and you need to be getting back to those clients as soon as possible. So I give myself 24. Rarely it's 48. And I want to follow up. I want to just get an understanding of what's going on, make sure they're comfortable, and let them know a little bit about like where we're located. Come into the waiting room, make yourself a cup of tea, grab some ice water out of the fridge, make yourself comfy. Like I want my office to feel like you're walking into not a super girly day spa, but I want you to come in and feel like the weight of the world gets to stay outside. And this is where you can pour your heart and soul out. And that's the feel that this office has and that I continue to work towards here at Mindset. Intake is one big session of just a general understanding. I go through their paperwork, the legal and the business stuff, and then I want to just understand them. I always start with strengths because I think that's the best and it's the hardest question for everyone to answer. What do you love about you? What are you good at? It is the hardest question ever for people. And I get it. We don't talk highly about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And we do a general get to know you to understand what is the areas, what are the goals you're working on, and where do we go from here? I love my clients that I have seen for years and years. I feel like they're part of my family. I love them dearly. And different things happen in their lives where they just need little tune-ups every now and then. They come in monthly, every so often. Call me as needed. I'm here. Call me, text me, email me, smoke signal me. I don't care. I'm here for you. And we want to build sustainability. So we want to address their problems and give them the tools that they need, but we want it to be sustainable so that no matter what comes up in life, they're able to manage. We're all humans, so we hit capacity and we need tune-ups occasionally, and that's fine. And we help through certain stages of life that they're going through. Sometimes people just like having that confidant. Other times we are working to understand and working with other professionals, their schools, their doctors, their functional medicine doctors to understand their treatment and how can we all work as a team to give the most and give the best change that this client is longing for.
That's beautiful. And you have other therapists that work with you, correct?
I do. I have a few wonderful therapists. I have Anna Larson. She's amazing. I have Layla Richards. She's awesome, does a lot of addictions in adults. Anna works primarily with kids. I have an intern, Julia, right now, and we are hopefully bringing on one more clinician this fall that will also work with adolescents.
Excellent. Excellent. As you can see, there's just a grown need for this population. So,
Oh, yes, it is.
It's really great that you guys are doing that. Okay, so my question to you is, what book are you reading now?
Oh man, I am reading. I'm doing a lot of work on internal family systems right now.
Okay.
So I'm reading a book on that, and I'm also reading a few junk books. I have an affinity for some Danielle Steele and some Nicholas Sparks book. Because you got to have that self-care. But I am deep into EMDR right now and understanding parts work and internal family systems. That's been on my carrying around with me everywhere I go.
Okay, so can you just talk briefly about the internal family systems? Because I'm seeing more and more of this, and patients are asking me about this.
I love this work. I call it parts work. But internal family systems is an awesome understanding of this guy was sitting in sessions and he's like, all my clients basically keep saying, well, there's this part of me that feels this way and there's this part of me that feels that way. And he's like, I wonder if that's a thing. And he developed this modality that I'm learning more and more about, of helping people understand that they're so complex. They're just not, they have their core self of who they are, but then they also have parts of themselves, and helping them understand these parts and give them love and empathy and compassion to help them. Because sometimes certain parts of ourselves will hijack that teenage part of ourselves that felt like it was never seen or understood. It's going to hijack, and it's going to make you start yelling at your partner out of nowhere because you're not feeling heard. So you're going to throw a teenage like tantrum. And that's that part of yourself that we start to work on. We help people say, oh yeah, there's a part of this. And we call the book No Bad Parts is what it's called, to understand that every part of who we are is good and serves purpose and is needed. But sometimes it hijacks us and takes over instead of our core self. So we need to understand that and let these parts have room to have a voice, to soothe it. So we get to our core self and who we are, and in essence gets to take charge, besides other sometimes parts that we're like, you might not be making the healthiest choice right now for me. I can understand why you're making this choice. You're trying to avoid conflict. But right now, that's not the healthiest thing for this relationship. We need to manage that part of ourselves. We need to soothe it and understand it.
Gotcha. That's beautiful. I like that. That's gonna help out a lot of people.
I think so. I think it's really fun. And people are like, am I crazy that I have all these voices in my head and all these parts? I'm like, no, this is the most beautiful thing about you.
That's excellent. So we covered a lot of things. We covered focus therapy. We covered the whole brain child. We covered psychedelics. We covered nutrition. We covered test anxiety. We covered social media teenager. Any words of wisdom you're going to leave us with?
Oh, my immediate thought is love.
All
Connect to each other. Find your bubble with your person and take that moment to connect to each other. Create your own little personal bubble. And because love is power, love is healing. And I know it can be scary, but it is the one thing that will heal no matter what.
We'll take that. That's a beautiful way to end tonight. Everybody, this is Dr. Michael Kaye from the Center for Functional Health. Carolena, thank you so much for tonight. And everybody can see the replay on YouTube and Facebook, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.